To Professional Communications. My name is Deb Casey, and I'll be your instructor for this class, for this semester. Professional Communications looks at the business side of communications, but candidly, I think you can also improve your personal communications by taking a course like this, because it looks at how we fall into patterns of behavior and mistakes we make again and again and again in the way that we communicate. And we're going to look this semester both at the written word and the spoken word, but we're also going to look at listening skills. And that's where we're going to start, because the listening skills, candidly, are the hardest skills to get down. So let's jump in and let's get started. So communication is like a three-legged stool. You know, if one leg of the stool doesn't work, you're having to perch and balance your communications a little bit more so you can rely on the ones that do. So it's good if you can get all aspects of communications down. So the three legs of the stool are the written, the spoken, and the listening. But if you notice, the seat of the stool is the largest part. So the largest part of our communication is in our nonverbal. It's the first form of communication that we learn, and it's the one we actually rely on the most. So you want to make sure that you're in tune with your nonverbal as well. You want to get good at encoding and decoding. In other words, you want to get good at making sure people can understand what you mean by your nonverbal and not get confused. And you want to be able to see it in other people and understand what kind of message they're sending to you. So again, it's a three-legged stool, and if one part of the stool is missing or doesn't work well, then the entire process is difficult. So 60 to 80% of your day is spent communicating in some form or another, listening, speaking, writing. And most of us are poor in actually two of them, and that's listening, speaking, writing, and nonverbal. How well do you know what your weakest link is? How well do you know where you do well and where you could use improvement? Well, before you can do any of that, the first thing you need to do is you need to know your learning style. I posted a link for you to go and find out what your learning style is. So once you know how you learn, it can help you to figure out how to improve the other forms of communication where maybe it's not your strongest method of learning. So if you gain nothing else from the course or this week, I want you to remember this. Communication is a learned skill. And as a learned skill, it can be improved, it can be enhanced. We don't come out of the womb being able to speak and write. This is something we learn, a process that we learn along the way. And as with any other process in life, processes can be adjusted, changed, and improved. We humans are laden with fears, and some of them are actually pretty interesting ones. But for the most part, there are 3 or 4 that always rank at the top year after year. And the first of those that I want to talk about is the fear of dying. Because when I ask this question in class, I always get, the fear of dying. And you would think that would be right up at the top of the list, but it is not. It is 7th. It is 7th on the list. And the number 3 on the list is fear of heights. And I always wonder how many people are put into a situation where they actually get to try, putting themselves at a high height and see how they feel. But fear of heights ends up being number 3. Number 2 ends up being fear of flying. I think of fear of flying more like fear of loss of control. If you could fly the plane, you'd probably feel okay about it. It's not a fear of flying. It's a fear of the unknown, the fact that you are not at the helm actually flying the plane. But the number 1 fear, year after year, for many, many, many years running, is the fear of public speaking. You would actually rather be in the box than doing the eulogy over the box. That's how much this scares the heck out of us. So that's what we're going to be dealing with in this class, and we're going to get you over that hump. So the logical next question you have to ask, now that we know that fear of public speaking sits at the top, is what exactly are we afraid of? Why are we afraid of public speaking? What is it about public speaking that makes us nauseous, so to speak? Is it fear of ridicule? Is it fear of judgment? Is it fear of failure? And only you can really answer what it is that causes you to get that angst when you think about public speaking. And it's funny, it's hard for me because candidly, I have never had it. I've always been very, very comfortable getting up in front of large crowds. When I was a young kid, my mother used to make me stand up and sing Irish lullabies in front of vast groups of people, so it really isn't a big deal for me. But in my own family, I have 2 or 3 people who it just scares the heck out of them. So I'd like you to try and assess, if you are afraid of public speaking, not everybody is, I'd like you to try and figure out exactly what is it about public speaking that makes you scared. So Eleanor Roosevelt was a very smart lady, and one of her many really intelligent things that she came out with is that she said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So if you feel inferior, ridiculed, not up to par, if you feel that somebody has made you feel that way, you're mistaken. You have allowed them to make you feel that way. You can't control what others say to you. There's just no way to figure out how to do that. You can only control how you react to it. So you need to find a positive way to react to anything that comes in your direction. You need to see feedback for what it is, which is a way to improve, and you need to stop worrying about something before it happens, and don't let anyone make you feel inferior, because the only way that can happen is if you give them your consent. So research has been done as to what businesses are looking for today and what they feel a lot of people coming out of school and starting in business, and even those already operating in business, are missing. And the number one thing that they tell us that needs to increase significantly is written skills. But they don't limit it to written skills. They also talk about how communication skills, especially now with these very flattened managerial approaches and very globalized and cultural workforces, is really in need of people with good communication skills. So writing is a critical component, and we're going to cover writing starting in week 2 and do a couple of writing exercises throughout the course of this semester. But candidly, we're also going to be looking at all of the communication skills, since businesses today have told us this is a critical skill, this is what gets you hired, but more importantly, this is what gets you promoted. So there's a reason why communication skills have really become paramount in businesses today, and it really starts with the way our management's structured in companies. It used to be that we were very top heavy. You know, the decisions were made at the top and the communication was passed down to the lower ranks, and we just executed. You know, we were more execution oriented in those days. That has changed. The management hierarchies are flattened, and there's more group work and interactivity and collaborative approaches than there used to be, but that puts a lot of pressure on a wider range of people within an organization to have those rich communication skills and that cultural sensitivity to work with a wide range of ethnicities. Because we have more participation and there's more teamwork and more group work, this is a change. It's a change in the dynamic or the paradigm of the way we work today. We've got more people who work long distances from one another and don't necessarily operate in the same area, so they don't see each other on a regular basis and don't necessarily have that same connection that people had when they all worked out of one building or one facility. This is the new trend in the way workplaces are set up, and because of it, it has put a lot more pressure on our ability to communicate. So the first thing we're going to look at is our ability to listen. And it's a really tough skill. It's one of the reasons why I do it very early on in the semester, because I think it's really hard to perfect it. And we're going to look at listening from 2 sides of the listening coin. The first side is when you're sitting in the audience or sitting in a classroom or at a meeting, and you're responsible for listening to what's being said. The second is when you're the one speaking, and how to help the listener be able to listen easier, better, and with more efficiency. And there are some best-in-class practices that you can employ, both on one side of that coin or the other, that will help you. And that's what we're going to cover in the next couple of slides. So as the speaker, one of the things you need to control is the noise level in any presentation. A lot of people are very sensitive to noise, scratching of chairs across the floor, somebody talking, underneath their breath behind you. These are real easy distractions to correct. If you're the speaker, the first thing you can do to overcome the physical barriers to listening is to speak up. Be louder than the distractions, so to speak. That always helps. The second biggest distraction that we see in listening that a speaker can help overcome are the psychological barriers. Tuning out ideas that are counter to somebody's beliefs in the audience, or you know there are people in your audience who aren't going to believe what you have to say, you need to acknowledge those. You need to say, listen, I get it. There are some of you out here who may think this, but open your minds and let me share with you this, and then make your decision. So by understanding that there are people who are going to tune you out because their ideas are counter to yours, by acknowledging and balancing your conversation, it will help a lot. And then there are language problems, unfamiliar or words that we use that they're clear to us, terminology for the business person that makes sense in your business but don't make sense outside of that. And I'll give you an example. So I worked for an analyst firm. And if you don't know what an analyst firm is, those are a collection of analysts whose job it is to predict and analyze, what's going to happen in a market. And in the analyst firm, we called on what we called AR people, analyst relations people. Well, I didn't come from an analyst firm. I came from a regular business. So when they kept saying to me, well, we're going to talk to the AR person, I'm thinking accounts receivable. Isn't that what most people would think when they hear the words AR? So I would go to the first couple of meetings in my company, and they would say, when you get in touch with the AR person, and I'm thinking, why would I want to call the accounts receivable people? So sometimes businesses have their own lingo that make perfectly logical sense inside that business or industry, but when you're speaking to people who don't come from that industry, it makes no sense whatsoever. So using unfamiliar terminology, using initials, using initialisms and terms that don't make a lot of sense to people, or even trying to make your language more highfalutin than it really needs to be. You can not necessarily what I call dumb it down, but you can certainly use plain simple English. I'm not sure when simple English got a bad reputation, but simple English will solve an awful lot of problems with people misunderstanding or misinterpreting what you have to say. And then nonverbal distractions, clothing, mannerisms, appearance. It is easy to become distracted by the simplest things. Somebody's got toilet paper on their shoe and they're walking across the stage. I don't care what's going on. You can't think about what they're saying. You can't concentrate on it because they're dragging a piece of toilet paper across the stage with them. So as the speaker, you need to really double check yourself every time you go out there. Look at your clothing. Watch yourself on video to make sure you don't have mannerisms that would be distracting, and make sure your appearance is in line. If you read the notes, you'll see I gave some examples of some things early on in my career that I made mistakes on, and I'm sure you'll get a good chuckle out of it. All right, so here are some other best-in-class practices if you're the speaker. Your audience's thought speed is 3 times faster than you can speak. That's just the way we are set up. They can think faster than you can talk. So without a doubt, we drift. And it has nothing to do with who's speaking. It's just a function of the fact that we think so much faster. So as the speaker, you need to bring people back, to the speech. And the way to do that is when they've lost concentration, and they have, and they will, is to use terminology like, this is an important point. Make sure you pay attention to that. I'm going to tell you 3 things. Here's the first thing. And then when you get to the second thing, here's the second thing. These little verbal cues, as I like to call them, will cause people to come back to you because there's something about the phraseology that you're using, that word choice, that lets them know, okay, I gotta drift back to the speech, and then I can drift back away. You just have to know this about your audience. And it doesn't matter who the audience is, they're going to drift. And then fake attention, pretending to listen. There are going to be people in your audience who are going to be pretending to listen. They're going to be nodding their head and asking you questions, but they're really not listening. And you have to be aware of that. And you have to be paying attention to the nonverbal cues that come in. And once you see a nonverbal cue and you kind of get the impression that somebody isn't listening to you, you can use your eye contact. Direct your eye contact directly at that person. Eye contact is a very powerful mechanism to get people to come back to the fold and pay attention to what you're saying. And then grandstanding. A lot of times what will happen is people want to interrupt you in the middle and ask you a question because they somehow feel it makes them look better. You need to address that right up front. I'll take questions at the end, or please write your questions down, and I may answer them, and if I do, then I don't want you to interrupt me during the way, getting through this, and then once I get through it, I'll answer all questions. And you'll find that you'll have a lot more people engaged in the conversation if you do that. If you start allowing people to interrupt you along the way, then you're going to be the victim of grandstanding, which is where people only do it to make themselves look better. So now we want to look at the other side of the fence when you are the listener, when you're in the audience and you're the listener. The first thing you have to do is stop talking. There is no way for you to listen and talk at the same time. So you have to make a commitment when you are in an audience to listen. And you have to ensure that by telling other people around you not to talk as well. You need to control your surroundings. If you're the kind of person that knows they get hot and they can't listen, or they get cold and they can't listen, or you don't hear well, then you can fix that. Bring a sweater with you. Wear your clothing in layers and sit up front. If you're the type of person that needs to be close to the speaker in order to listen well. Be receptive. Go in thinking, I'm going to learn something. I go into every single time I talk, and every single time I am in the audience thinking, today I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to keep an open mind and learn something new. If you have a closed mind, if you're not receptive, I don't care how good the speech is, you're not going to learn anything because you're going to close off to it. Keep an open mind and anticipate learning something. Listen for main points. Because we learned earlier that our thought speed is faster than the speaker can speak, we know we're going to drift. So start listening for main thoughts. Start taking down the main points and paying attention to that. And capitalize on the lag time. If there's lag time in between, start writing down some things that, maybe you can use this information for something in your current job. So if you want to build powerful listening skills, both as the speaker or as somebody who's in the audience, you need to listen between the lines. You need to judge ideas and not the appearance of the person who's speaking. You need to wait until the end before you ask questions and avoid grandstanding. And take selective notes if that is your learning style. Because everybody has different learning styles, when you're the speaker, you need to take that into consideration. Some people can just listen. Other people need to listen and see it. Some people need you to give them an example to go along with it that they can gravitate to. Some people think and learn in story format. You need to, as the speaker, understand your learning style, but as the person who's doing the presentation, you need to recognize that not everybody can get it from just you standing up there for 20 minutes pontificating or just getting up there and speaking. And then finally, you need to provide feedback, but you need to ask for it as well. So if you're the speaker, you need to ask people to give you feedback. It's very easy to become very one-sided and see it from your own perspective, but how other people see you on the other side might be completely different. So you need to ask for feedback on a regular basis. It also cuts the pain you can sometimes feel or the defensiveness you can sometimes get when you don't ask for feedback in small segments. And then remember that judging a person does not define who that person is. It defines who you are. Your appearance certainly sends silent signals to the audience or to people at a meeting, but it really goes beyond what you're wearing or how you look. It also includes the appearance of your business documents, how organized you are when you get to a meeting. Do you show up early or do you show up late? So these things all are important, all add to your image or can take away from your image because these are all part of your nonverbal. As you're building your nonverbal skills, I urge you to associate with and ask questions of people from diverse cultures. Appreciate the power of appearance. I know it sort of goes against everything we talk about, but you really need to understand that we are creatures of our senses. Our sense of smell, our sense of sight, and this is just how we think. We think in terms of our senses. We're emotional, social, sensory beings, and we have to take that into consideration. We can't just assume that everybody can look past that. I like watching yourself on videotape because you really do get to see some of those mannerisms that are just now inherent and part of the way you present. And enlist your friends and family. Ask them to watch you. Ask them to mention things to you if they see something. Encouraging feedback from every source that you can is really critical. So the method or the medium of communication is also under siege and changing. Mobile and social formats have certainly made an impact in how we communicate. But probably the biggest change that we see when we look at mobile and social formats is the immediacy. That we hear that ding and we want to respond right away. And good business communication usually takes thoughtfulness. So one of the things that we need to challenge ourselves with is to find a way to do text and IM and use social mediums, but to do it in a thoughtful approach. And throughout the course of the semester, we'll be looking at that. We're going to look in depth throughout the course of this semester at culture and how it impacts all of the different aspects of communication. But to start with, just a quick breeze through. North Americans place a lot less emphasis on tradition and ceremony and social rules than do some other nations. Now, part of this could be we're a relatively young nation in comparison to some of the other cultures out there. Other cultures may prefer a little bit more formality. So even though American business culture has become a little less restrictive, that does not mean when you go to Europe or you travel to Asia that you need to have that same level of informality. As a matter of fact, you need to tighten that up and be a little bit more formal. And eye contact changes depending on the culture you're in. In the United States, we equivocate good eye contact with honesty and trustworthiness, but that is not the case in Asia. In Asia, they don't necessarily concern themselves with that. They actually, it can almost be seen as a sign of disrespect. So you really need to understand the culture that you're going to be doing business in, or the people in those cultures that you're going to be doing business with, and that will make it a lot easier to not make the faux pas that are very easy to make when you're in another culture. And throughout the course of the semester, we will rely on each other, each other's experiences, and for some people, their own cultural background to see if we can learn some of the things that might change depending on the culture and avoid making mistakes. Time is another aspect of cultural differences that you need to get used to. The time orientation here in North America, specifically in the United States, is we correlate time with productivity, efficiency, and money. So for us, time has a very important value. And we see wasting time as something that, we're not into building relationships like that happens in other cultures. When you're in Asia, time has a much more relaxed atmosphere when it comes to business. They're not going to do business with you the first couple of times that they get to know you. Instead, you have to develop a rapport, develop a relationship. We feel like we're wasting time when we're doing that. So you have to really understand these small nuances. Time is just one small thing that you have to understand when you're dealing in a different culture. So the next couple of slides have proverbs from various cultures. This set of slides here is the United States, and then you have China, and then you have cultures from other parts of the world on the third slide. And cultures have proverbs that reflect those cultures. So let's see if you can pick up what kind of what's indicated about the culture when you take a look at them. For example, here in the United States, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, the early bird gets the worm. Pretty indicative of the way we see time and productivity and efficiency, right? This is typical of a proverb you would expect. As with any audience, you need to take into consideration using simple English when you're in a multicultural environment. But candidly, I think you should use simple English when you're in any environment, because you don't have any clue who things are being forwarded to or who else might be reading your missives or communications. So you really should use simple English regardless of what the audience is. You should speak slowly and enunciate clearly, but not insultingly slowly. Just make sure that you don't go too fast. New Englanders have a tendency, and some cultural languages as well, have a tendency to be very fast talkers. That's just the way we are. So you need to slow down because people need to be able to take in what you're saying, and you need to pause while you're speaking. If you don't pause, then it sounds like you're going from one thought to the next, and they can't tell when one thought ends and another begins. If you think back to the fact that we think faster than people can talk, by pausing, it gives people an opportunity to say, oh, there was a break in the action, so there must be a new thought process coming in. Encourage accurate feedback and check frequently for comprehension. Those are really simple tools and simple best-in-class practices, but trust me, if you can follow these three simple things, it will work.